Hey, it's Congressman Stewart, and I know you guys held a town hall, but unfortunately, I was in Iraq at that time, doing some intel travel that we'd planned, of course, many months ago. But I know that some of you submitted some questions, and we've looked at those, and we appreciate those questions, and I'd like to take a minute to answer them if we could. So we have them here on my phone, and I'll play the question, and then we'll get to your answers. So the first one is from Madeline. Madeline is here, and this is what she asked.
Stewart. My name is Madalena, and I'm your constituent in 84106. And I'm just wondering, as a leader in the intelligence community, what are you planning to do about Trump's connections to Russia?
You know, it's interesting, Madalena. I was in Moscow last summer, and when I came home, I said during some press interviews, even back then, this was before anyone else was talking or aware of it, I said, Russia is going to try to interfere with our elections. And it was obvious not from any specific intel, it was just obvious from their history and reading into their intentions that they would like to influence once again. And the reason being, they want to break down the institution, they want to break down the trust, kind of that fabric that holds our democracy together, and that's faith in free and fair elections. So we've been looking at this. Our first hearing was actually before the election. It was last September. And as we've learned more, and some has been revealed, those hearings have taken on a greater urgency. I have to tell you, to be fair, some of the things you've read in the press just simply aren't true. And that's why we want to pursue these hearings. We want to separate the truth from the things that are fiction. We want the American people to have faith in the report that we'll provide them. And the Intel Committee is a great way to do that. We're generally bipartisan. The Intel hearings are almost always classified, and that makes it so there's no television, there's no media, and that eliminates a little bit of the grandstanding, and we can do a little bit more of a serious work and a little bit more of a bipartisan work. So we're going to continue those investigations, and we'll see where it leads us right now. Hey, it looks like we got another question from Brett here. So Brett, go ahead.
Congressman Stewart, my name is Brett Manzi, a constituent of yours in St. George, Utah. My question for you is in regards to the Johnson Amendment. On February 2nd, President Donald Trump at the National Prayer Breakfast had said that he would totally get rid of and destroy or abolish the Johnson Amendment. I find that very troubling, and I ask of you, will you stand with secular America to prevent Mr. Trump from getting rid of the Johnson Amendment and thereby preventing the possibility of dark money from individual donors into churches and other tax-exempt organizations affecting our politics? Thank you.
Well, actually, Brett, this is one where I happen to agree with you. And by the way, you live in a great part of the state and a great part of the district, and I love St. George and love spending time down there. But I belong to a church which has always said they don't want to be involved in political questions. And I think most Americans share that view. Now, having said that, I think that whether you're a religious person or a not religious person, all of us want to have the ability to express our opinions. And as individuals, we should always maintain that right. But 501(c)(3)s or religious institutions, I actually think there should be a separation where they are more careful in endorsing candidates and other overtly political activities. And we got a question from Kathleen here. So here we go, Kathleen.
Hello, Congressman Stewart. My name is Kathleen Dennis. I am your constituent from Bountiful, and my zip code is 84010. And I'd like to know if you support expanding deportation regulations of illegal immigrants to include those who have been living here peacefully in Utah for a number of years and whose only crime is to be here illegally.
Kathleen, it's a great question, and you know there's an awful lot to consider in this. It's interesting that President Obama actually expanded deportations more than any other president. And when I first ran in for Congress about, 4.5 years or so ago, I said at that point, and by the way, this was almost a controversial view, especially among my Republican friends, because immigration was a very emotional issue at that time. But I said, look, if you're here illegally and you've entered the country illegally, I think there probably should be a little bit of a price to pay for that. But I never supported a security organization that would be able to round up 11 million people. I mean, that's every man, woman, and child in Utah and Idaho and Montana, Nevada, and probably a couple other states. So I just recognize that in my view, they probably are ineligible to achieve citizenship. But on the other hand, I would like them to have a green card. I would like them to be able to know that they can stay here, that they can come out of the shadows, that they can work without fear, and that if they choose, their children could become citizens. And when I meet with immigration activist groups and I explain that view, almost all of them say, you know what, we could live with that. And when I meet with others who are from the other side of the fence and they're more aggressive in their immigration ideas, almost all of them say the same thing. You know what, we could live with that bit of a compromise. And I just think that that is a solution that would not solve the problem entirely, but it would allow us to move forward. It would, I think, satisfy most people and allow us to put this question behind us. One other thing I would mention on that I think is important, and I think most Americans agree with this, by the way, and that is the first thing we do have to do is secure our border. As long as we feel like the border is porous or we have no control of our border as a nation, people will be anxious about immigration. But once we solve that problem, it allows us to kind of have a more calm and a more rational conversation about now what do we do, and I think it would allow us to come to solutions like I've suggested here. All right, we've got Patrick in Salt Lake City who's got a question. Patrick?
Hi, my name is Patrick Jones. I am your constituent in my zip code is 84106, and I would like to know what you're going to do to protect Utah's public lands and keep them keep them federal and open to all Utahns and not sold off to the highest bidder. Thank you. Good.
Patrick, thank you. You know what? When I got out of the Air Force, I was writing books. Turns out as a writer, you can live pretty much anywhere in the world. All you need is electricity and a computer. But I chose to live in Utah. And the reason I did that is because I love to ski, I love to rock climb, I love to sit in my backyard and look up at the beautiful mountains. And I think that's why most of us choose to live there. And there's this bit of a narrative sometimes that goes through politics that says if you're a Republican, you don't care about the environment, you don't want to preserve it. I think that's nuts. For heaven's sakes, every one of us who live in Utah love Utah and want to preserve it. And by the way, Patrick, I don't know anyone, at least no serious person, and I don't know any political person who has suggested that we take these public lands and that we sell them. Now, there are some lease arrangements where they can maybe extract minerals, or some lease arrangements that maybe allow for some timbering, but I don't know anyone who has suggested selling these public lands. We want to preserve them. I want to preserve them for my children, just like you do. I don't think we're differing in our goals there. I think the one difference that some individuals may have is what's the right mix? What's the right mix between, allowing access? I grew up ranching and farming, and I know many ranchers in the southern part of the state, in my district, who have been terribly impacted by some of the federal restrictions that have been placed on, say, for example, the Grand Escalante National Staircase, where they have been ranching down there for generations. They too love the land. They have helped to preserve the land. Even after all of that ranching, it was still worthy and still pristine enough to be called a national monument. I think that there's probably some areas of compromise we could reach where you could say, let's allow some of these activities to continue while at the same time trying to preserve those lands. And that's what I would be committed to doing. All right, we've got a question from a military mom. And for those of you who don't know, I served in the Air Force for 14 years. My father was a World War II veteran, as were, I think, 4 of my brothers. My dad and mom had 6 sons, 5 of us served in the military. So military runs deep in my DNA. It's something I'm very grateful for. And April has a question.
My question is for Congressman Stewart. I live in Congressional District 2, and I'm not being paid to ask you this. My question has 2 parts, so please bear with me. It is related to your position on the House Intelligence Committee and the fact that I am the mother of an active duty service member. Will you investigate President Trump's ties to foreign governments and the dangers of his personal financial considerations driving military action? In other words, can you assure me that my son's unit's current and his future deployments will be based on actual intelligence and actual American interests and not the result of the administration's financial entanglements?
I'm going to answer these questions one at a time, April. So first, thanks to your family and to your son for serving. And I hope you know, and that many people know, that millions of Americans pray for our service members every day to keep them safe in the things they're doing. I don't know of anyone who suggested that America is about to go to war in order to benefit any individual, including our president, financially. The institution is just created to stop that type of a thing. General Mattis, the Department of Defense, as you know, the leader of our Department of Defense, is one of the finest men that I know. He's one of the greatest leaders of our generation. And he's made his views very clear about what he knows and considers to be very important. In addition to General Mattis, there is an entire institution around them, including Congress, who would have to authorize a use of military force, including other members of the administration, including leadership within the Pentagon, including leadership within the intelligence community, as you've acknowledged I am a member of as well. All of those forces are there to bring measure and to bring some stability and some thoughtfulness before America would ever undertake what is the most serious thing that we ever could do, and that's to initiate a war or to initiate a military action. I can assure you with a great deal of confidence, your son will not be asked to go to war or to initiate any type of combat activity for anything other than to protect Americans and to protect American interest. I'm very confident of that. Now let's get to the second part of your question.
Part two, I'll have to abbreviate because I'm running low on time, but President Trump has publicly advocated for looting, torture, and targeting of civilians. Since the commander-in-chief seems unclear on the Geneva Conventions, how can I assume that my son's unit will not be ordered to commit war crimes? And then there's Steve Bannon and his apocalypse agenda. I'm sure you think that I'm getting hysterical, but your job is to provide a check on the executive branch, and so far I have seen nothing. What are you going to do about it, Congressman? We're waiting.
Well, once again, I think I answered the question initially. Again, these institutions are set up for something that makes sure something like that doesn't happen. By the way, I have never heard the president advocate for the intentional targeting of civilians. I've never heard him advocate for looting. You know, if you have a video of that, I'd love to see it. I'm not aware of it at all. In fact, I quite doubt that he's ever said that. He has indicated in the past that he would consider waterboarding. I actually disagree with that. And by the way, I hope you know and appreciate that when I do disagree with our president, I'm willing to say that I disagree with him on that. I agree with General Mattis that we have gone through a process, we've looked at waterboarding, we've said that it's not appropriate. It is in fact, at the current time, illegal. I think that's the right policy. I would object to changing that policy. So, and there are many others of us in Congress who feel the same way. I think that once again, the institutions are set up to bring kind of a countermeasure, to bring some balance to those kinds of decisions, and I'll certainly act in that regard. All right, we've got Kelly from Salt Lake who wants to talk a little bit more about immigration and maybe the border wall.
Congressman Stewart, as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, you will be essential to the next step of building Trump's wall with Mexico. You have said in statements that you are, quote, concerned about how Trump will pay for the wall. However, we know that this will be paid for through high tariffs that will be passed on to American consumers. Why have you not come out with a statement that says it is unacceptable for Americans to pay for the wall with higher food prices and higher prices for other goods that come from Mexico? Thank you.
Well, again, I appreciate the question. I said earlier in a response to a question, I think most Americans feel it's essential for us to secure our borders. And I don't know if that's going to be a physical wall. I kind of think it probably won't be. If you want to see examples of other walls that can be effective, you know, look at what Israel has had to build around Gaza, for example. And I think that could be a better model for us, where they were able to protect themselves from almost continuous terrorist attacks. But they didn't build a 10-foot high wall. So I don't know, I'll leave that up to administration and to Homeland Security to make that decision. They're the ones who are more appropriate to do that. But as far as how we pay for that, I don't know that we have the right answer for that. I don't know that the administration has said this is how we intend to pay for it. Congress is looking at it right now. I think there's probably a dozen different options, and I don't think we've decided yet which one of those is preferable. We'll see. I know we will have to pay for it, just like we have to pay for all essential government services, including, like I said, securing our borders. But we don't know yet really how we're going to generate the revenue to pay for that. And hi, this is Denise from Salt Lake.
Hi, my name is Denise Hoyle, and my zip code is 84108. My husband and I moved to Salt Lake City 2 years ago, and we've fallen in love with this beautiful state and all its natural beauty. Our main concern is that we'd like to know what you plan to do to continue to maintain the natural wonders of the state. I teach at one of the local public elementary schools, and it really saddens me to see that in the time I've been here that there have been warnings that the children can't go out to play during recess on certain days because the air quality is so terrible. That's a real concern, and it's something that I hope concerns you as well. Thank you for your time.
Regarding air quality, that's a real challenge. And we have this unique geological reality in Salt Lake City of the mountains and the cold air which holds the inversion in. Salt Lake City doesn't produce any more pollution than Nashville or Portland or any other city our size. It's just, once again, we have those mountains that make it very difficult for us. And I want you to know that I myself, we have a personal commitment to trying to reduce the impacts on the environment. For example, here in Washington, D.C., I don't own a car. I walk everywhere I go. In Washington and also back in Salt Lake, we've encouraged our employees to take the train, and a large percentage of them do. We're doing what we can to reduce our impacts. There in Salt Lake, the vast majority of the pollutants come from people who drive cars. The second largest comes from homes. The third largest comes from just small businesses, and one of the smallest impacts comes from actual industry. So we can get rid of all of our industry and it's not going to solve the problem. It's going to take people driving less or driving more efficient cars. Last thing I'll tell you is that this is something that I take personally and understand. I had 2 children who had very serious respiratory illnesses, and it was discouraging for me to sit on my front porch and to look out over the valley and to see that inversion and to see those pollutants in the air. It's something that all of us would like to fix. And we've got Stephen who has a question here as well.
Good afternoon, Congressman Stewart. I'm Steve Ober, a constituent of yours in Bountiful, Utah. Since I know many others will have nuts and bolts questions for you concerning the Affordable Care Act and the GOP's repeal and replacement strategy, I'll keep my question to you really, really basic. Do you believe that equal access to affordable health care is a citizen's right implicit in documents establishing this republic, such as in the Declaration of Independence, Life and Liberty and Pursuit of Happiness passage, and in the Constitution's 14th Amendment, Life and Liberty Clause? Or, on the other hand, do you believe that health care is a privilege that could be withheld from the poor and those with life-shortening conditions? Thank you. I look forward to your response.
Stephen, I appreciate the question. And although the term health care or health care coverage isn't included obviously in the Declaration of Independence nor in the Constitution, I think that, like most Americans, I believe that all of us want to have equal access to health care. The question is, how do we pay for it? And the reality is that some people have more money than others. Some people struggle a little more. It's a little more difficult for them to afford health care. And that's where the Republicans are trying to help. When you look at the Affordable Care Act, the thing that I think is that we can do better. We can provide for more coverage. We can actually drive down the cost. We can actually help families and not hurt them, or we don't hurt them in employment, and we don't force them to do something or to buy coverage that they may not be interested or may not actually need. That's what we're trying to do when we look at some of the reformations we'd like to make with health care. All right, and it looks like our last question, Courtney would like to talk to me.
Congressman Stewart, I'm wondering how you will protect the freedom of press and protect our basic liberties from choices made by the Trump administration, which may not agree with that.
And I'm curious when you're going to stop towing the party line and start doing the things that you know are right and the things that your constituents and the the vast majority of the public support. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's actually two questions there. One of them has to deal with freedom of the press, and of course I support freedom of the press. I hope the press is honest. I hope that they're fair, but I don't know anyone who wants to take away freedom of the press. Quite the opposite. I think freedom of press is essential to a healthy democracy. Once again, though, I don't think that they should be beyond criticism, and when they do lazy reporting or dishonest reporting, I think it's okay to hold them accountable to that. And the second question, I don't remember it exactly, but it was basically, when are you going to start responding to the vast majority of your constituents? I think it's important to remember, I represent a conservative district. Utah is a conservative state, and I try really hard to represent everyone in my district, whether they're liberal, whether they're conservative, or whether they're kind of in the middle. But at the end of the day, you have to do what you think is right. But I think the implied in the question was that I'm not trying to do that, and it's just not true. I was reelected last year with something like, I think, almost 30% margin. I won by, I think, 62 to 33%, something like that. I don't really remember. But I think that's an indication that the vast majority of the people in the district agree with what I'm doing right now. The election before that, I won by about the same percentage. Now, I'm not making decisions just based on what it's going to take to be reelected. I'm making decisions based on what I think is right. But at the end of the day, I hope those decisions will align with what the majority of my constituents believe as well. So far they have. I'm going to keep trying to make that the case. But once again, I'm not here in Congress to get reelected. I'm here in Congress to try to help our country. I'm here in Congress to try to help people in Utah and my constituents. And I'm always going to do what I think is right for them.